Good morning, everybody, and happy Thursday. We're going to get started here shortly. Yeah, if you're joining us here right now early, we're gonna get started in about a minute or two. Been watching global markets here for several hours already, and it's a decisive risk-on move that we are seeing. So I think for the time being, this is going to be the tailwind. And we will be discussing this here in just a moment when we get started. Okay, let's get started. We are 2 minutes past the top of the hour. Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Serge Berger here from Set the Market, from the Steady Trader, I should say, with our Set the Market morning show. If you're here for the first time, great to have you here. We specialize, or if our sort of shtick is, 10 to 15 minutes, top things that we're looking at, and making sure that we respect everyone's time, including our own. I get right to the point. Well, it's been 24 hours, obviously more than 24 hours, but 24 hours since the markets have essentially done one thing, and that's just go, risk assets, I should say. And that is go straight up higher in a straight line. And if there's one thing that we are seeing pretty clearly is that this is a risk-on trade. And if you, for example, look at the NASDAQ 100, again, it doesn't take too much creativity to see that we've actually now, at least for the time being, broken above what used to be resistance. The S&P 500 did the same. The Russell 2000 did the same. I'll walk you through those as well. The Russell 2000, however, is now, as a result, right back at a point of resistance. Ultimately, I think it can break back above there, but the Russell, to me, is a bit of a tougher one to look at from an investment perspective. So I'm going to skip that one for the time being. But large caps, again, S&P, NASDAQ 100. So I think those are the kind of things where there's going to be a lot of momentum. And so our top three things here this morning is I want to show you guys two specific trade ideas that we are going to be discussing in a lot more detail. With clients. We already discussed it yesterday quite a bit. And then I do want to quickly look at what happened yesterday in Bitcoin and of course, Coinbase and some of those stocks that are related to that. Because if indeed there is the possibility of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, to me, and I can't really quantitatively put a number on that, but I don't see why Bitcoin shouldn't be going to 150,000 pretty quickly if that were to happen. Obviously, just my thoughts. That's by no means my price target right now. But I as we digest all this information, well, what we are seeing though, or are gonna see, is a very different sort of structural landscape under the U.S. administration that's going to come in early next year, and because the Republicans are going to have both the House, the Senate, and of course the White House. And so what we could easily start to see is the regulatory spigot open up on the Bitcoin side. And we've talked about this now for the past number of weeks, and we mentioned that, it's not a breakout until there is a breakout. Well, we now have one. We don't have one yet in Bitcoin on a weekly closing basis. because today's only Thursday. It is Thursday, right? Yeah. But if we close, above that line meaningfully by tomorrow, then we have at least a weekly closing basis, at least from a work week perspective. So that will be quite constructive. And so if you then on top of that look at what some of the price action that's been taking place over the past, let me show you this, over the past really since August, but now most notably yesterday, in some of these names that are related to a crypto universe within the United States that looks friendlier, then we could easily imagine that something like Coinbase could ultimately start moving a lot higher. Because if a lot more people and retail folks are going to get involved, then Coinbase is also going to benefit from that. And I think that ultimately could be very constructive for something like Coinbase. So that's one thing. Again, it's not just the fact that we have a new administration, but the fact that they can kind of now really push through many things that they want to, and particularly if they want to be crypto friendly, attract to a younger crowd, which so far on the surface seems to be the case, then you could see Bitcoin a lot higher, like 150 grand or more, in a somewhat decent time frame. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking there. Now, another trade that I'm watching very closely, I have not put anything on myself, and we just started talking to clients about it yesterday, is Intel. Now, if you think about Intel, which is from a trending perspective still in a very bearish trend, so nothing really to write home about. But before we look at the short-term technicals, what's really interesting and fascinating about Intel, which, by the way, did get a momentum buy signal yesterday from the TSD trender, we had what's called a chop zone. So we had no valid signals now for a number of weeks. But we finally yesterday broke out of this chop zone. So we had this chop zone where we don't do trades because it's just going back and forth. But finally yesterday we broke out after having a new momentum buy signal. So Intel has that working for itself. But before we look at the near-term technicals a bit more, the really interesting thing here on the long-term, sort of structurally, as it relates to the election yesterday and the outcome, is that if you think about Intel as a domestic U.S. chip producer, and some of the rhetoric around tariffs and things like that on foreign-produced chips that might come into place with the new administration, then a domestic producer like Intel, could be treated favorably relatively. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that represents positively in the stock. Of course, I understand they don't have those AI chips that NVIDIA has, so there's that. But that's something to keep in mind from a flow perspective. So if I then were to figure out, okay, well, and what I'm talking about there is more of an investment theme, right? But if you're now looking at this technically, and just if you want to just put on a trade to make a little bit of money in the near term, what I'm asking myself is, okay, well, I've got some pretty defined lines here. We had what used to be resistance, now became support. Now we broke out of this. That's nice. We've got this blue line here, which is really kind of useless, so I'm going to get rid of it. And now we essentially have a bunch of empty space above where the market is right now. So basically, we've got this empty space here to where that down gap took place in the month of August, or early August. And so from here, if you were to fill that gap, you're looking at about 15% of upside. Now, that doesn't mean that has to happen today, tomorrow, or next week. But to me, there's a gravity, a magnet, if you will, an attraction point somewhere up in here where this stock could now float to. And now it's not just the technicals. What I like about it is, again, the structural backdrop, i.e. the election outcome yesterday, that could now be some tailwinds. Are there any questions on this or comments? Just want to quickly pause here for just a second before we go on to the third point. I should also mention before we continue, please do give us a thumbs up like. Please subscribe to the channel because if you do, you'll be updated in real time when we do these live sessions, when we do have new content like podcasts and so on, and live analysis and so on and so forth. And it allows us to continue to do this show without having to shut it down. So it sounds like we're good on that front. And again, if you have questions, I'm happy to happy to entertain them later. But the third point really is China. And if you look at what, for example, Hang Seng did overnight, up about 2%. Now, obviously, Hang Seng is not mainland China, but we continue to get more constructive, and we actually think that whether it's KWEB or the FXI ETF, that the Chinese are probably going to do some more stimulating, and that could ultimately be positive for the Chinese market. So we actually added KWEB and FXI to some of our subscription products over the past month and a half or whatever it's been. And so we still think that backdrop is very structurally positive. Now, of course, this has less to do, if anything to do at all, with the U.S. election results. But I thought I would add something in here that goes a bit above and beyond the U.S. election results yesterday, which, of course, was and is a big deal because it does affect policy and so on and so forth. And the last point, really, because this is our last morning show for the week, is just quickly giving you a heads up on something that I think is important here now to understand from a tailwind perspective, just from a price action perspective. And so you look at the S&P 500 here and you say to yourself, well, we're trading at, 21, 22 multiple forward next year's earnings. We might have rates go down a little bit on the short end, but the yield curve's gonna steepen. And, you kind of draw these lines and you can kind of see, okay, well, in the past, if this line were to hold true since 2022, so, for the past couple of years, we might see the S&P be able to go up to, roughly maybe 620, maybe 615, the SPY. So that's another, it's not lights out, but it's another, let's call it 3 to 5% or something like that. And we could be more, right? I'd love it for it to be more. In fact, I'd love us to have an absolute, vertical rally here, and then that'll be it. And then 2025, we'll just basically go short and do bear calls or whatever. However, what I think we have to consider here in the fourth quarter is not just that we now have these animal spirits alive. We have more clarity, which is great. That's what markets love, clarity. But also we have a lot of stock buybacks. I mentioned this to our Inner Circle members yesterday. There's a lot of stock buybacks over the next 4 to 5 weeks, so that's a big deal. Very little supply, meaning not a whole lot of new IPOs, if any, coming to the market. And also investors have been raising cash over the past number of weeks into this election. And if they want to, play the performance chasing game into year end, which many of them have to because they're underperforming, then they're going to reinvest the cash that they were raising over the past number of weeks. So a lot of tailwinds here for risk assets to go higher. And so from that perspective, we think we could see the SPY at 620, i.e. the SPX, S&P 500, 6,200, over the course of a number of weeks here as we round off 2024. A lot of tailwinds. I'm not sure what would have to happen for people to get into a serious, selling spree. I don't know. Maybe some horrible economic data. The bond markets could certainly force things. If bond yields go notably above 4.5, that could be something. But outside of that, the structural, supply and demand dynamics in the market look very favorable for higher prices now for the remainder of the fourth quarter ish, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So there you have it. As usual, short and sweet and right to the point. 15 minutes here this morning. Our set the market for Thursday, November the 7th. Remember, we do this Monday through Thursday. We don't do it on Friday because I do need a day off here and there, but also a lot of my Fridays are spent on basically doing research. So that's why we don't do it on Friday. But excuse me, make sure you come back next Monday. In the meantime, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Help spread the word. Hit the thumbs up like button. I know it takes very little effort, but please do so. It really helps us to be able to continue this. Otherwise, we ultimately have to shut it down. And I actually really enjoy doing this, and I think from the feedback we're getting, people seem to enjoy it as well. And also, again, obviously the benefit to you primarily is that you get live updates when we do these shows and analysis and new content on the YouTube channel. So thanks a lot for joining. Have a great Thursday, and hopefully this was helpful today, and we'll see you soon. We'll see you Monday.